Friends, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on this evening of November 7th. It's a little past 7 p.m. on East Coast time here in the United States. So, thank you, friends, for joining us. Uh, we have a very important program tonight. We have journalist Dan Cohen here with us to discuss the situation in Gaza, the ongoing massacre, genocide of Gaza being done by Israel, supported by the United States financially and politically. And tonight's event is actually the first of three events we have coming up. This event tonight, these three events this week and next week are sponsored by the Community Church of Boston. The Community Church of Boston is an institution that's been around for over 100 years now. They were formed in protest to World War I and in support of Sacco and Vanzetti. And over the last 100 years, we've had very remarkable speakers contributing to the public discourse, including Martin Luther King Jr., W.E.B. Du Bois, and many more. Some of these programs, such as W.E.B. Du Bois and Cesar Chavez and others, they can be found on our YouTube channel, which I'll be sharing in the chat later. Tonight's program with Dan Cohen is the first of a three-part series we have planned tonight. We're going to hear tonight from Dan Cohen. On Thursday, 2 nights from tonight, we're going to screen a film called Killing Gaza, which was made by Dan Cohen and Max Blumenthal. And it's about the 2014 assault on Gaza done by Israel and the United States. And so we're going to screen that on Thursday night of this week. And then the following Monday, November 13th, we have Max Blumenthal joining us live at Community Church in Boston, Copley neighborhood, 565 Boylston Street, second floor. So join us there physically if you can, or that event will also be streamed online, just like this one. So again, friends, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to get right to it and not waste much time. The format of tonight's event is going to be, we're going to start with Dan Cohen. He's going to open up with some remarks, and we're going to listen to that. And then after that, we're going to we have a set of questions prepared for Dan, and we're going to present these to him. So that's going to be the format of tonight's event. If you all have any questions or comments, we welcome you to share them in the chat. I apologize in advance for not being able to get to every question and comment tonight. So without further ado, I want to welcome our guest tonight, Dan Cohen. Dan is a journalist and a filmmaker. And as I said, he produced the film Killing Gaza, which we'll be watching on Thursday. He's also the founder of Uncaptured News. And I'll be sharing links to find more of Dan's work. Everyone should look into Dan's work online, on Twitter. He's doing really great work to inform the public about this conflict. So it's really my pleasure and my honor to introduce Dan Cohen. Dan, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Amar, for having this, for holding this. Thanks to the Community Church of Boston for holding this event. It's a very important moment, obviously, given the unspeakable, not tragedy, but crime that is occurring, crime against humanity that's occurring in the Gaza Strip. And thank you to everyone who's joining, who's taking time out of their Tuesday evening to partake in this. I'm gonna try to keep my remarks brief because I think Q&A is I like to be interactive more than just talking. The latest death toll, the latest figures from the Ministry of Health in Gaza. These are the official figures as of 6 p.m. Gaza time, which was about 6-7 hours ago, are 10,328 deaths, 26,000 wounded, 1.5 million displaced. Israel, over the last, 30 days, 31 days, has bombed everything from homes, schools, hospitals, universities, mosques, churches. Everything possible, wedding halls, recreation centers, children's hospitals, everything. There is nowhere safe, and has led to an unimaginable humanitarian catastrophe. While Gaza is left to fend for itself, and the people are unable to escape, even if they want to. You have tens of thousands of infants. The this was reported today. Tens of thousands of infants and children in Gaza are at grave risk of death from dehydration and malnutrition. They're being starved to death because of the siege and the bombardment. Um, this is not about Hamas. Rather, this is the logic of Zionism. This is because they are considered, in the words of Shimon Peres, the great liberal icon, and Barack Obama, former US president, beloved by Democrats. This is because these babies are considered demographic threats to Zionism. So this is the maintenance of Zionism. It has nothing to do with Hamas. I think we should start with October 7th. I'll just give a quick remark on October 7th. I think many of us were asked to condemn Hamas, condemn what happened on October 7th. And I think I want to kind of give my sense of how do we answer that question? How do we respond to that? Do you condemn Hamas? And I look at it this way. Hamas is a political party and a resistance movement born out of occupation. And the reason that it is in power in Gaza is not because of its popularity of its conservative politics or ideology overall. It is wildly popular in Gaza, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, where it's brutally repressed, because of one simple thing, because it resists against Israel, against occupation, and against siege. And there was no other movement that does that. So on October 7th, after 17 years of siege, of a completely unlivable situation in which the United Nations said Gaza in 2015, I believe, the United Nations said Gaza would be unlivable by 2020 if nothing changed. Well, in fact, it did change in that time. There was more Israeli bombing, more bombing campaigns. So Gaza is completely unlivable. The vast majority of the young people there, the overwhelming majority of the younger generation, have never left the Gaza Strip, an area far smaller than Manhattan Island, for example. And all they know is war, destruction, and death. So what should we expect these young people to do but seek their freedom, carry out some kind of attack, any way to get out of their prison? And it's not pretty. We may not like how it was done, and certainly people can question how it was done, but we have to understand that it is a response. It is people breaking out of their cage. When you treat people like animals, when you dehumanize them, they're going to react in ways that are not pretty. If we look at revolutionary violence throughout history, look at the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, do we think that if the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto managed to get out and kill some Nazi officers and also killed some of their family members or took some of them hostage, would we think, well, maybe the Nazis were right then about the Jews? Of course not. Only Nazis would think that. Just like now, anyone who thinks that, well, because of any of horrors that happened on that day, October 7th, to innocent Israeli civilians, well, then that means Palestinians must be kept under permanent siege and occupation. It's the same logic that would be applied. And this is what Zionists believe today. We look at the Haitian Revolution, the only successful slave uprising in history. Well, how do you think that the Haitian slaves treated their owners, the slavers, their masters? They killed them, and that was simply a reality. And we look at the Haitian Revolution. We honor it today. It's one of the great revolutions of history. Or the American Revolution here in the United States. How do we look at it? Well, what did the North do to the South? Went and burned down villages. But nobody says that, very few in this country say that the American Revolution, or the Civil War rather, was bad, or what we did to the British in the American Revolution. So my point is, revolutionary violence is never pretty, but it's kind of like giving birth to a baby, in that It's not a beautiful process, but what you get afterwards is. And so, what I pray is that we're actually seeing the beginning of the Palestinian revolution, the end of Israeli apartheid, occupation, and siege. Um, I mean, so that's how I understand October 7th. The other aspect of it is what Israel did that day. Um, we now know that this was not simply a Hamas massacre, as we were told in the media, but rather Israeli forces, as they arrived on the scene, were given orders in at least one place to fire tank shells at homes where Israeli hostages were held by Hamas militants. So what why was that order given? Well, this is the logic of the Hannibal Doctrine, an Israeli military doctrine which states that if an Israeli soldier is taken captive by enemy forces, then the Israeli military should do everything possible, use unlimited firepower to ensure the death of that soldier. And of course, any collateral damage, meaning Palestinians who are in the way. This happened in the summer of 2014 in the southern Gaza city of Rafah, where Israeli soldier Hadar Golden was taken captive by Hamas, and Israel unleashed a massive amount of firepower, killing their own soldier, and as well as many, more than 100 Palestinians. So this brings us to, and we can get into this more maybe in Q&A, but what is, the reason that so many Israelis were killed that day? Clearly, Israel had a role in that. It's the orders that came down to shell homes and kill these civilians in order to prevent them from being taken captive. Because if they're taken captive, they can be used for negotiation. They can be used to extract concessions from the occupation. Now, what happened is Hamas managed to take, not only Hamas, but also Palestinian civilians who got out of Gaza as the gates were opened. They took hostages, they took captives, soldier and civilian, into Gaza, far more than the Israeli military could fend off at the time, as it was basically left. It was totally unprepared for the events of October 7th. Now, we know there are something like 260 hostages. Hamas has said 60 of them have been killed by Israeli bombing. So there are, let's say, 200 or 250, somewhere in there, Israeli hostages in Gaza. Well, let's look back. So what does that mean? What could Hamas potentially extract from Israel for that number of hostages? If we look back at 2006, when Hamas captured the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit. In 2011, Gilad Shalit, after 5 years of captivity in what the Israeli journalist Ben Caspit called a mini vacation, because of the conditions he lived in, watching the World Cup, going to the beach, eating dinner outside with his host family, he was finally exchanged in 2011, this one soldier, for more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. Among those prisoners was the leader of Hamas inside Gaza today, who is the architect of the armed resistance. Now, one soldier for over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. Now, if we have, say, 200 or 250 Israelis held captive in Gaza, and there are about 5,000, 5,500 Palestinian prisoners, well, you can imagine that if Israel were to engage in negotiations, it would have to give up all of the Palestinian prisoners. And not only that, it would have to consider, there would be further demands from Hamas, which would be lift the siege, agree to the two-state solution, which Hamas has agreed to. Now, we are talking about an Israeli government that is not this is not the days of Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat shaking hands on the White House lawn. We are talking about the rise of an apocalyptic right-wing movement dedicated to full ethnic cleansing of Palestine and conquest of the region, expulsion of all of its indigenous peoples, and anyone who resists is to be executed on the spot. So and of course Christianity and Islam, any religions other than Israel's twisted form, demented form of Judaism, which is not Judaism at all, would be the only religion allowed. So this, of course, is not an ideology that you can negotiate with. So with this mindset, with this ideological background ruling, Israel has clearly decided we will use the Hannibal directive on those hostages who were in the settlements in kibbutzim. Not only that, but on Gaza itself. So this bombing of everything in sight is not only about killing as many Palestinians as possible, but I believe that it is about killing as many Israeli hostages as possible in order to prevent any kind of negotiation. And we see the reaction from Israeli society where people whose loved ones are trapped inside are protesting outside of Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem now and are being brutally beaten by Israeli police. So we have Israeli society largely, coming apart in many ways, and so here we are at 30 days in with more than 10,000 dead, and I suspect many, many more of thousands trapped under the rubble. Many of these deaths, I think more than half are children, and constant the imagery, the images coming out of Gaza on a hourly basis by the minute is one more shocking than the next, where it leaves many of us sleepless and depressed. But I think we can't be depressed. We have to, because this ultimately comes back to the United States, and I think maybe that's something the U.S. role is something we'll discuss in Q&A. So maybe I'll leave it there, and we can just get into question and answer.
Okay, awesome, Dan. Thank you so much for those remarks. Okay, let me just say, we have 100 people in the Zoom meeting right now. I didn't realize the Zoom meeting had 100-person capacity. There's a lot of people trying to get on, and we've kind of maxed out at 100 people. But there's a YouTube link, so if people want to share that around with,
I'll tweet that. I'll
yeah,
tweet
that
that
would
because
be great.
okay, hold
Awesome.
on, give me 1 second.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Okay, great. So Dan, you're gonna tweet that out, and yeah, I'm gonna put in the chat as the program goes on. Our links to join us for the Killing Gaza film screening and future events, and also how to find Dan online, like his platforms.
Where can I find that link, Amar?
I'm gonna
Where
put
did
it
you
in the
put it?
chat right now. It's in the Zoom chat right now. Okay, Dan, for the first question, and you touched on this in your remarks, the events of October 7th. It's very unclear, and we can't trust what Israel and what the United States are saying about what actually happened on October 7th. They were saying 40 babies were beheaded. They were saying babies were put in ovens and baked. They're saying all types of things. And then there's eyewitness reports from even from Israelis saying that they saw the Israeli military kill Israeli people fighting people from Gaza. So could you talk a little bit more about the events of October 7th and also the kind of the propaganda or the cloud around them, the lack of clarity?
Well, what's amazing is we saw immediately the Israeli government, its propaganda apparatus, and the Western media um, launch a very cynical propaganda campaign with the claim first of rape, which I haven't seen any evidence of rape. I'm not saying it couldn't have happened, um, but very specific claims. And then the main one, of course, became that 40 Israeli infants were beheaded in the kibbutz of Kfar Aza. Now, that fell apart very, very quickly. If you were paying attention to social media, there was a report that originated with a report from the Times of Israel. I'm sorry, not Times of Israel, I-24. This is an Israeli media outlet owned by some, I think, U.S.-based tycoon that is known. There's a report in Haaretz that talks about how it directly takes orders from Benjamin Netanyahu's office. So this reporter, an American woman, I think her name is Nicole Tzedek, she actually, with a smirk on her face, said that soldiers had told her that they saw 40 beheaded babies, and this spread like wildfire throughout the media sphere. The State of Israel's official Twitter promoted it. An account called Israel War Room promoted it. Israeli officials promoted it, and then it took on a life of its own. It spread like wildfire, and of course, this generated outrage and horror. And so, over the next days, this was repeated ad nauseum throughout the Western media, which acted as a megaphone for Netanyahu, where we just heard nonstop 40 beheaded babies. Hamas beheaded 40 babies. The thing is, this actually fell apart as quickly as it spread. It fell apart as journalists raised questions. Israeli journalists who went to Kfar Aza and spoke to military figures said no, they didn't. There was no evidence of that. They didn't even mention it to these Israeli journalists. So it was clearly a planted story that spread all over the place, even to the point of Joe Biden saying that he had seen pictures of these 40 beheaded babies, and the White House the next day retracted this statement from Joe Biden. Now, that idea of 40 beheaded babies, well, as if it wasn't bad enough, as if what happened on October 7th for Israelis was not bad enough, they had to lie about it. The Israeli government had to lie about it. Why would they lie? To make it worse than it actually was. Well, for one, to cover what we found out about the testimonies that Israeli forces opened fire on their own people, intending to kill them, fired tank shells at houses where Hamas militants had Israeli captives held inside. Not only that, to cover up the reality of what happened, but also to generate bloodlust, to have the sort of shock and awe propaganda campaign to get the Israeli public hyped up for a massive killing spree, but also in the Western media. So for people sitting here watching CNN in their homes and in the US, to be so enraged and to see Palestinians as so barbaric that Israel has no choice but basically to use the full force of its military with support from the United States to stop, to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. So we just see what a cynical deception it was. It fell apart as fast as it started, but many people to this day believe that Palestinians actually beheaded 40 Israeli babies, despite the fact that we haven't seen a single real photo. And it's sick that we even have to debate this, that we even have to parse over these details. The fact that there's never been a name that has been released of any of these supposedly beheaded babies. We've never seen a parent, a family member, or anyone come forward and say, yes, my baby was beheaded. It's only been statements and claims, and then that have been walked back repeatedly. So that was the original lie that got this whole genocide going. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the United States. While Israel is doing these massacres, this genocide essentially on Gaza with weapons, U.S. weapons and U.S. political support, the U.S. is doing pretty much nothing, it seems like, to de-escalate the situation. They're basically supporting Israel completely. Tony Blinken was in the Middle East. So Dan, talk a little bit about the U.S. policymakers and their role and their position in this conflict that's happening in Gaza.
Well, the U.S. policy has always been to give Israel blanket support, but now more than ever. It was, 90% of the bombs that have been dropped on Gaza were supplied by the United States. So this is, in many ways, Israel is acting as just a proxy of the United States. And we have to ask, at what point is the United States considered a direct participant in this war? If we are making the weapons, being able, to carry out this genocide, if it wouldn't be possible without not only our weapons, they're flying American-made airplanes, warplanes. The Biden administration is giving complete diplomatic support at the UN Security Council. They've shot down resolution after resolution calling for a ceasefire. So the U.S. has played an essential role. Netanyahu's one of his top military advisors, a guy named Yitzhak Brick, who actually predicted October 7th. He said that this some kind of major event was going to happen from the Palestinians, and this whole idea of peace was a farce. He has said that we wouldn't be able to do what we do without the U.S. So when the issue for the U.S. now is that, of course, we're seeing massive demonstrations. Just this past Saturday here in Washington, D.C., I was one of roughly 300,000 people that marched to the White House to demand a ceasefire and negotiations. And this is clearly having an effect on public opinion and forcing the Biden administration to feign consternation. So when Antony Blinken went to Tel Aviv this week, according to CNN, he told Netanyahu's cabinet that you don't have unlimited time for this war to quote unquote defeat Hamas. There's going to have to be a ceasefire at some point because of public pressure. The public is losing its appetite. No matter how many times they repeat 40 beheaded babies, the images that are coming out of Gaza have taken center stage. The horrifying images of actually beheaded babies beheaded by Israeli bombs and shelling. Now, when Blinken told him that, according to CNN, well, Netanyahu actually went public a few hours later and completely rejected the premise that this would stop anytime soon. So we have to ask, who is actually in control here? Who is calling the shots? Is it the United States that is funding Israel to the tune of $3.8 billion per year, plus other military packages and emergency funding? I think the last one was another. I can't remember the exact figure of the last package. I want to say like 14 billion, but I can't remember if that's right. But the United States is giving all of its is not using any of its leverage. So if the United States wanted this to end tomorrow or right now, it could, but it's not doing that. Instead, it's not only rearming Israel, giving it more weapons packages and diplomatic support, it is deploying aircraft carriers to the region and issuing threats to Lebanon, to Iraq, to Iran. So the U.S. role is allowing this possibility that this war, this genocidal assault on Gaza, escalates to a regional war that threatens the lives of millions of people, and could even escalate into a world war. And if that happens, no one can say. It could be. No one can say what it could lead to. I mean, if Iran were attacked, it has the capability to destroy U.S. assets in the Middle East, in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, not only military installations, but energy production infrastructure. So this war could easily destroy the global energy infrastructure and crash the global economy and energy production. So the stakes are incredibly high, and it could not be more reckless what the Biden administration and Netanyahu are doing. So it's a very, very perilous moment.
Dan, talk more about that, about the risk of this expanding into a greater conflict in the Middle East or even in the world. Talk about Hezbollah and these other countries in the region.
Well, we have to understand Hamas as part of what is known as the axis of resistance. Now, that includes Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah, the resistance group in Lebanon, in the south of Lebanon, the government of Syria, the military of Syria, of President Assad, in Iraq, the popular mobilization units or forces, Hashd al-Shabi, and Iran, the state of Iran, and then in Yemen as well, the Houthis in Yemen, who have fought a genocidal assault from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and backed by the United States. So these one, two, three, four, five groups are, are essentially understand each other as a chain in which no link in that chain can be broken. So if they sense that Hamas is somehow on the verge of defeat in Gaza, then they see that as an existential threat. Now, Hezbollah in the north or in southern Lebanon has already been engaging the Israeli military. And I don't know exactly how many Hezbollah fighters have been killed, but I think it's well over 20 now. So the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, gave a speech last Friday saying that all options are on the table, and this could easily escalate into a regional war, and that they have plans to take out the U.S. Warships, naval carriers that are not far off of their coast in the Mediterranean Sea. So, if this escalates to a full-on regional war with Hezbollah involved and Hamas, this is potentially, if not guaranteed, to be an existential threat to Israel. Hezbollah is far stronger than Hamas. It has more men. It has more weapons. It has more experience coming out of the Syrian war, where its forces were engaged in ground combat. This is something the Israelis don't know much about because they are used to lording over a docile civilian population in the occupied West Bank. So now we're talking about something that Israel may not be able to handle and has to rely on the United States even more. And given Israel's fixation on war with Iran, we have to wonder, is that exactly what Israel wants? Is to drag the United States in so much that it ends up fighting Hezbollah, Syria, and Iran on Israel's behalf. Which, if that were to happen, again, what we saw in 2019 when General Qasem Soleimani of Iran and the leader of the Iraqi popular mobilization units, Abu Mahdi Mohandes, they were assassinated. Iran launched a missile at the Al Assad air base in Iraq and made it very clear that it has powerful military capabilities that the U.S. cannot counter. Certainly, the U.S. could do all kinds of damage to Iran, but there is no way to stop Iran from fighting back. And again, the distance from Iran across the south to the Strait of across the Strait of Hormuz is extremely small, and that is where many targets of, like I said, U.S. military and energy infrastructure are sitting ducks. Those cannot be defended from Iranian missiles. So if those are destroyed, the Middle East, basically energy production is gone. And that will, of course, crash the global economy. So that's, these are the stakes. The stakes could not be higher. And so, if there is any sense, anyone in the White House or the Pentagon, I mean, they need to be, putting a leash and a muzzle on Benjamin Netanyahu and forcing him to negotiate. But unfortunately, the Biden administration, or whoever's controlling Biden, who's clearly not all there, is hellbent on following Israel's lead on this neocon project, which could lead to a global catastrophe.
There's videos of Benjamin Netanyahu bragging. He's bragging on video about controlling the U.S., owning the U.S., owning the U.S. Congress. Dan, talk to us about who is Benjamin Netanyahu and his history and his background, and why is he doing what he's doing, and what's his political standing in Israel before and after October 7th?
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu is maybe best understood as an American neoconservative. His formative years were here in the United States. He was raised in Philadelphia. Um, I've heard that when he gets angry and he shouts, he switches to English. So um, he's deeply embedded in the American neoconservative movement, which seeks, to project total power and have a single unipolar world order enforced at the barrel of the American military and its full force. Um, he is now the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history. He surpassed David Ben Gurion 1 or 2 years ago. So he is the quintessential Israeli prime minister. He markets himself to the Israeli public as the one most adept at manipulating the American political system to Israel's advantage. So he's a very dangerous Machiavellian figure who will do anything to stay in power. Now, he has been embroiled in scandals in Israel, not because of his war crimes, of course, over the years, but because of corruption, where, for example, he was giving sweetheart contracts for telecommunication in the telecommunications industry to like family members of his. I mean, I'm trying. The details for me are a little. I can't remember all of them at the moment. There was the most actually striking one to me was that he bought from Germany. He bought I think it was five nuclear weapons capable submarines when he was only authorized by the Israeli military to buy two, and it turns out that his cousin was the representative of ThyssenKrupp, the German company that manufactured those submarines. So it's not only about the purchase; it's about the maintenance of these submarines, which is billions and billions of dollars. So that's one of the issues. In fact, in the Israeli protests against him, you can see people carrying like big mock submarines. So, and ThyssenKrupp, I should say, where that's a Thyssen and Krupp were the two companies that were the backbone of the Nazi war machine, that were reconstituted into a single company in the decades following World War II and the Holocaust, and that's who, ironically, Israel buys its nuclear weapons capable submarines from. So, in order to avoid prosecution for these crimes, for his corruption, he turned to the ultra right wing, what is known as basically the Kahanist movement, named for Rabbi Meir Kahana, who is kind of the patron saint of the ultra right in Israel. He was an Israeli. He was from Brooklyn, and he was kind of he was just an overt racist who agitated in New York against black populations, and worked for the FBI. In fact, snitching on anti-war Vietnam War protesters. And then he brought his brand to Israel, where he became kind of a rabble rouser and was seen as a threat to the political establishment. So he was, after being elected as into the Knesset, his party was eventually banned. Now, after his party was banned, he his political work and his legacy, and then his assassination, his acolytes continued to grow his basically his ideology. And as Israel shifted further and further to the right, it became that ideology of total expulsion of all Palestinians, of all non-Jews from the land of Israel, became more and more popular, where now you see secular right-wing youth saying Kahana was right. And that's kind of a mainstay of what you hear in Israel today. Kahana was right. He was right. We do have to get rid of the Arabs. So one of his acolytes was a guy named Itamar Ben Gvir, who was part of this terrorist group, what was listed as by the Israeli government and the United States government as a terrorist group. Itamar Ben Gvir is now the public security minister, the internal security minister in Israel. He's the head of the police. You may have seen videos of him handing out rifles to settlers in the West Bank to go use to carry out pogroms against Palestinians. Where this is another aspect of the horrors that are unfolding now that is not getting talked about enough, is that the pogroms that are happening in the West Bank under the cover of this war on Gaza. So when it was election season, Netanyahu went to Itamar Ben Gvir and his party called the Jewish Power Party, and made a deal with him and then another at that time recently formed party called Religious Zionism, and basically made a deal with them and said, we can make a coalition and make a government, form a government, if you guarantee me legal immunity so I'm not prosecuted for these crimes. And that's exactly what he did. So he brought these fanatics into power in order to protect himself. And now they're all running the show together. So you have a completely eliminationist, even apocalyptic right wing governing the country. And after the October 7th attack, the long-term debate in Israel between the left and the right, the left believing we just maintain permanent apartheid, the Palestinians stay in their refugee camps, and if they rise up or carry out anything we don't like, then we use our military force to go beat them down, teach them a lesson, mow the lawn, as they call it. And then that's been the status quo. The right wing says, no, we need to expel them, exterminate them, get rid of every single last one, because this is our land. God gave it to us. There's the theological justification, and then there's also the, how can you have someone who's your mortal enemy, your bitter enemy, living so close to you? And so their logic is actually more clear cut. It actually it has a straighter logic than just a permanent contradiction of they stay over there and we're over here, and there's going to be fighting. So what happened on October 7th is that permanent apartheid status quo idea was totally discredited. And so now we see pretty much the entire country lined up behind the eliminationist right wing of Itamar Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich and Benjamin Netanyahu, who are saying, no, we have to get rid of all of them. Now, in the Israeli public, Netanyahu is the most hated man. He's the most hated man in Israel, for one thing, because of his corruption, and secondly, because, of course, he failed to prevent October 7th from happening. So as long as this war on Gaza goes on, he's protected, because the Israeli public is busy, thinking about Gaza, the hostages, how we're going to kill them, all the Palestinians, and expel them into the Sinai. But as soon as that stops, as soon as there's a ceasefire, they're going to come for Netanyahu. The Israeli public is going to come for him. And, who knows what's going to happen? His political career could be totally finished. So he has every reason to keep this war going simply for his personal, and political expediency. So, I mean, that's basically where things are. And that is Benjamin Netanyahu, who, will commit genocide in order to protect his political career.
Many of my friends, some who are on the Zoom call tonight, they feel like this Israeli surveillance state, how could they not have known about the October 7th attacks? They're skeptical. They feel like they knew and they let it happen because for Israel to take over Gaza, to implement a plan to take over Gaza that had been in place before. So could you comment on that, Dan? And then also, could you talk a little bit more about what's going on in Gaza? Some people, I think including you, have reported that U.S. Special Forces are in Gaza fighting with the Israeli military. Other people have reported that hundreds of Israeli military have been killed since entering Gaza on land. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, in terms of I don't know that Israeli special forces are in Gaza. There are, I'm sorry, American special forces are in Gaza. I haven't seen anything suggesting that. There are private, mercenaries, U.S. mercenaries, former special forces who are around Gaza, and taking pictures and this kind of thing. There are also um, American special forces who are in Israel. Supposedly, they say, I mean, to me, this is kind of a cover to assist with uh, locating the hostages in Gaza. And there are also U.S. military drones flying over Gaza, ostensibly again um, to locate hostages. Now, is that what they're really doing? I'm very skeptical of that, because if this were really about locating hostages, then there's a much easier way to do it, which is negotiations. Um, so there's no doubt that the U.S. military is directly involved in this war on Gaza, in this genocidal assault. Um, what does that mean legally? I don't exactly know, but that's for legal experts to determine. But I mean, there's no doubt that the U.S. is there. Inside Gaza, I don't know. Above Gaza, around Gaza, absolutely. Um, the other question about, yeah, what, like, how could October 7th have happened? I mean, there's, you know, I don't know exactly. We don't know what the truth is about what happened on October 7th. How did it happen? There is, the we can look at um the fact that Israel has been extremely focused on expanding settlements in the West Bank, and had its military deployed, the vast majority of its military deployed throughout the West Bank, because it thought that it had Gaza beaten down. It had made Hamas docile through yearly bombing campaigns, and that it basically had a handle on the situation. Obviously, that was not the case. And Hamas was very strategic in terms of how it kept its plans for this attack secret, um, even from many of its members, all but a few, any of its allies in the region, from its political wing. Um, and it also did not respond to Israeli attacks, showing that it was, incapable or didn't want to or anything like that. So it kept its cards very close to its chest. Um, Now, when if you go to Gaza, and like you're around, Shujaiya or Hosea, or the eastern side, there it's a relatively insecure area, where if one or two or three people or 10 people were to try to rush the border, Israeli snipers, yeah, would be able to shoot them, or as quickly after they cross the border, probably they would be able to take them. But when you have a mass amount of fighters, figuring out, who have planned some way to get over the border, unless they have a strong military presence right there that's prepared, um, they're not going to be able to do it. And so, with the focus on the West Bank, uh, thinking they have Hamas basically docile and basically asleep at the wheel, that is enough for Hamas to be able to organize some kind of secretive attack that the Israelis did not know about. Um, is it possible that Netanyahu, that there was some kind of conspiracy in the highest levels of the Israeli government, establishment, security state to allow this to happen? Certainly, it's possible. I haven't seen any concrete evidence showing that that's true, though. We can't rule out basically false flags. It could be that they thought, we're going to allow this to happen, but they didn't think it would be at the scale that it happened. And, maybe Hamas kind of tricked them in that way. That certainly could be. There are all kinds of possibilities. The thing that I think we should understand, well, we should, seek to determine and find out as much information about exactly what happened on October 7th. I think that we should also keep in context that we're sort of debating the nature of an avalanche. Like this was going to happen one way or the other. Now, did a rock shift under the avalanche and cause the whole thing to come down, or did somebody come and throw some kind of little explosive on it to get the whole thing started, and there it goes? Well, if that happens, certainly that's very important to know. But either way, we have to understand that when you keep 2+ million people in a bombed out ghetto, one way or another, they are going to rattle the cage and try to get out, regardless of the consequences. That's how I see October 7th.
Okay, thanks, Dan. All right, so I'm just gonna make a reminder here that we're screening Dan's film Killing Gaza on Thursday in a couple days. It's about the 2014 war on Gaza, which at the time I thought was the worst thing ever, and now what we're seeing is even worse than that. So we're gonna watch that on Thursday. Um, so Dan, can you talk? One of the interesting, fascinating, kind of disgusting things we've seen since the last couple of weeks is within Israel. Ever since Israel started massacring Gaza again, um, there've been people in Israel like making videos of themselves, posting it on social media, mocking the people in Gaza for not having water, for not having electricity, for dying. So in a lot of the video, in some of the videos, they're dancing, they're celebrating, they're they have their children in the videos. Why? It's really crazy. Why are they doing? Why are they so hateful? Why are they putting their children in these videos? Why do they hate the Palestinian people so much?
Well, Israelis are basically taught from the time they're children, in order to justify this permanent apartheid genocidal project, you have to dehumanize the victim. So, just as, Nazi Germany, Jews were thought to be, racially inferior, and a whole bogus, scientific framework was applied, and they were thought to be, carriers of disease, um, this kind of thing. There's so many examples how Africans were thought of, the fake intellectual framework of race science that's been applied to Africans to carry out, the genocide and slavery. The same thing happens, of course, in Zionist Israel, where Palestinians are considered, you know, they say these people are not a nation. There are no Palestinians. They're just, run of the mill Arabs from Jordan and Saudi Arabia who came here and are occupiers. And then they'll also say, they are um, the 21st century incarnation of Nazis. They are in fact Nazis. Um, so people genuinely believe that they are actually Nazis. And like, here's, for example, there is a Telegram channel called Dead Terrorists. Okay. Has anyone else seen that?
Yeah, yeah, I don't know what that was.
Real classy. Okay, some Zionists. Okay, that's the best they can do, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. I don't know. I clicked it away. I guess it went away. But
yeah. I don't know. Sorry, I don't know how that happened.
yeah. It's all right. So um, there's a Telegram channel called Dead Terrorists, and it has 100. All right. Well, I guess when that comes up, we'll just. I don't know how to. Let's see.
Yeah, hold on. Let me try kicking this
Host. Oh,
person
here
out.
we go. Here we go. There we go. Now it's they can't do it anymore. Host only whiteboard options.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Yeah. Um so when so there's a Telegram channel with now 105,000 followers that is called Dead Terrorists, and all it is images of dead, mutilated bodies of Palestinians, the most graphic images possible. I mean, it's horrifying. It's just absolutely horrifying. But for these 105,000 followers of Hebrew speakers, they're laughing about it, and but all of them say, these are, look, another dead Nazi. This dead Nazi is a cockroach. This, so these Palestinians are, in their minds, Nazis. That's literally what they think they are, and that's how they justify it, because these people are going to kill us, so we have to kill them first. And it's not just, you know, I mean, the logic is, well, the young ones are going to grow up to be Nazis or Hamas or whatever they want to, whatever they call them. So they're a threat to us, and this is the logic of Zionism, that all of them are threats. This is not like a political ideology. This is not about Hamas. This is about a people who want to wipe us out, and so all of them are threats. That's the language that Shimon Peres and Barack Obama and people who called Palestinians demographic threats use. They just do it in kind of a nicer liberal way. They say, oh, we have to maintain a Jewish demographic majority because otherwise, it won't be a Jewish state anymore. So it legitimizes this idea that Palestinian babies are threats to Israel. So to dehumanize it, in order to carry out ethnic cleansing and genocide, you have to dehumanize people to an incredible degree. Treat them as not only Nazis but as barbaric. That's one of the reasons they came up with the 40 beheaded babies canard. That lie was to make these people seem inhuman, to do things that no one is capable of, that no human is capable of. So it's all about stimulating that kind of bloodlust. And those examples you gave of people doing videos mocking Palestinians in Gaza, where they're drinking water and turning on the lights. There's ones where they're covering themselves in makeup to look like they're under the rubble. These kinds of things. There's ones where they're pretending to be taken captive, where they're sitting blindfolded. And I mean, really, the one that drives it home for me is that Telegram channel, because I mean, 105,000. Like, when I actually calculated what percentage of Israeli society, it was at a little over 90,000 followers. That was 2 weeks ago or so. Now there are like 7.4 million Jewish Israelis, and so I calculated that was about like 1.4% of Israeli society is part of this Telegram channel of Hebrew speakers, or it's part of this Telegram channel. So that's nearly, and now it's over 100,000. It's 105,000. So that's about 2% of Israelis are part of this Telegram channel that is enjoying, not just looking at, but actually enjoying the sight of mutilated Palestinian dead bodies. The gorier, the better. I mean, 2%, that's 1 in 50. I mean, imagine, of 50 people, in your neighborhood, that if, like, just, apply that to the United States. If 2% of the entire population were watching this that is a huge, huge number. And so it just really speaks to the level of the level of dehumanization and racism that's so pervasive in Israeli society, that it's not just a matter of like, let's turn a blind eye and pretend that we're just killing terrorists. It's no, we're actually going to enjoy displays of sadism. It's really shocking. So that's where Israeli society is today.
We're gonna keep going, everyone, until 8:30 tonight. So we have a couple more topics and questions that we're gonna get into. There's a question in the chat, and a question a lot of people have about these natural gas reserves on the coast of Gaza, and what implication that has for the Israeli and the U.S. policies in regards to Gaza. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I haven't looked into that yet as closely as I want to, which I regret. I've just been so busy with documentary work and other journalism. But yeah, I mean, I think that plays a big role. I mean, if we look at, you know, it's like when we look at motivations for October 7th, like why this could have even been a false flag. We look at Netanyahu's, political career. We can look all the way from the kind of like micro level, the local level, all the way to the geopolitical level. And so China has constructed its Belt and Road Initiative, to basically offer an alternative to U.S. neoliberal system of basically we take your resources and you suffer. China has offered an alternative system, which is mutually beneficial economic programs and deals. And for obvious reasons, this has grown all over the world. And so the US sees this as a huge threat and has sought to establish some pipeline. I think from across the Gulf states, um, and then across which would have to go through southern Israel and then to Gaza, and then through Gaza and then the coast of Gaza. So I don't know the details really well. I think Richard Medhurst did a video that I think explains it in detail that I've been meaning to watch. But I mean, these gas resources, you can only imagine how much money and fuel energy could be in there. So that's another, I think, a very that could be a very key reason.
Okay. Um,
Maybe let me respond. I mean, I do see one message. This is a direct message that I think is fair, something I should address. Someone named Madeline says you're painting with a broad brush, ignoring internal dissent in Israel. Yes, I mean there is a tiny bit of dissent. I'm not saying there is zero dissent in Israel. There is the families of the hostages, as I did mention, who are demonstrating outside of Netanyahu's office and who are demanding a ceasefire and negotiations for the safe return of their loved ones, without a doubt. So that does exist, but overall, I mean, by and large, Israeli society, is lined up behind Netanyahu and his extermination of Gaza, because as I said, the kind of left side of Israeli society, the whole status quo of apartheid has been discredited, and it's as some Israelis have said, there was an interview with a mayor that I watched of in southern Israel who said it's like something changed inside me, a switch was flipped. So now it's everyone is lined up on the right side, where it's total extermination. But that doesn't mean there is no resistance in Israeli society. I mean, I think of it more like maybe like in Ukraine, where after the 2014 coup d'etat, which brought these Azovite Nazis to power, the small number of dissidents in the country were hunted down, killed, imprisoned, went into exile, this kind of thing. So there is a small amount of resistance, but it's very marginal, and it has no political power whatsoever.
I want to talk a little bit about over the last few years in the United States and elsewhere. There's been some people who their main issue has been like free speech and open discourse. Someone like, for example, Brett Weinstein, who is a popular podcaster and commentator. He's an academic who's been, I guess, a skeptic of the COVID policies and things like that. He kind of promotes himself as like this courageous truth teller, this guy for free speech and open discourse. And he's been making these comments about this conflict in Gaza, this Israel-Palestine conflict, and you challenged him, invited him to a debate, and online there was like a lot of response. People want to see that debate because they want this official narrative of this conflict to be challenged. And he's making these phony excuses. He's not debating with you. And also, like another example would be Bobby Kennedy Jr., Robert Kennedy's son. He's also another guy who talks a lot about free speech and open discourse and stuff. but when he was on the live on the Jimmy Dore show, and Jimmy Dore asked him, will he debate Max Blumenthal on this issue of Israel and Palestine? He said yes. He said yes multiple times. He hasn't done it. It's been months. He's like backing out. He's not going to do it. So and also on top of that, the reason I bring that up is because he put out support for this letter Bill Ackman wrote, this hedge fund Wall Street billionaire who's writing these open letters to the president of Harvard, saying that students who protest for Palestine, they need to be exposed and reprimanded. They can't get jobs in society. There's been trucks here in Cambridge going around like trying to shame students who support Palestinians or Palestine. So these what I'm trying to say here is these people who talk about a lot of these people who talk about free speech and open discourse, they're hypocrites because when it comes to Israel, they want people to be canceled. They want them to be fired from their jobs. They want them to be reprimanded. So Dan, talk to us about that. Talk to us about what's going on with you and Brett Weinstein. And yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, Brett Weinstein is a former professor who has this thing called he has the Dark Horse podcast, and he's part of something called the Intellectual Dark Web, which, he has these long form podcasts. I think he does with his wife where, it's supposed to be like kind of experts talking at length about various subjects. And he's been tweeting really kind of sensationalist and clueless. He's been making statements on Twitter X about Gaza, Hamas, Israel that it's obvious to me he has no idea what he's talking about. And it's basically the same thing you'll hear on CNN or anything in the mainstream media. And so I asked him, like, he follows me on Twitter. And so, and I follow him, and clearly sees my work. And so I asked him, do you want to have a debate? And he got very incensed by the question. Well, what do you disagree? What do you think we disagree on? And I showed him 2 tweets of his, and I said, we disagree on this and this. And and there was a very strong response from the public that showed. I tweeted, hey, if you want to see me have a debate with Brett Weinstein, let me know. And so the tweet blew up. It got several thousand likes. So clearly there's a lot of interest for some kind of exchange, and it doesn't have to be a contentious debate. It can be conversation. And so I messaged him privately and asked, and just clarified, like, hey, I'm not, I don't have any reason to have a contentious debate, but I mean, there's no journalist in the US who has spent as much time in Gaza as me, and I know Israeli society very well too. So I think it would be really good to clarify these things. And he got very incensed by me saying that I think he's a Zionist. And he, basically, the funny thing is, the first thing he said to me in direct messages on Twitter is he said, well, I'm not qualified to talk about this history or the current events. But publicly, he's making all kinds of outlandish statements that he obviously has no idea what he's he doesn't know the content, he doesn't know the subject, but he's saying it anyway. So it's totally contradictory. And so after we went back and forth with him being very, very sensitive to me saying he's a Zionist, and me explaining, he said, well, what do you think Zionism means? And I explained it, and he didn't like that answer. So he's declined. And people are calling on him to have this debate, to have this conversation, including people who are totally neutral, who liked his work on COVID and my work on COVID, where we sort of aligned. But he won't do it. So what we see is, I can't get any Zionists to debate me, because they simply, I think they know that they can't stand up to they can't hold up in a debate. The only time I've been able to debate a Zionist lately is yesterday. I got invited by a moderator, a liberal Zionist moderator, to debate this Egyptian guy who lives here in Washington, apparently, who calls himself a Zionist and is actually, works with Stand With Us, a Hasbara propaganda outfit funded by the Netanyahu's office. And so that went I basically just destroyed him to the point where he tweeted yesterday saying, I've made a huge mistake by debating Dan Cohen. Oh my God, how could this happen? And he was, pilloried for it. It was a really hilarious moment in a very dark time otherwise. So, I can't get anyone to debate me. And it's, what can I say? It's because I actually know what I'm talking about. I've been on the ground. I know what Gaza is. I know what Hamas is, and the fact that I'm a Jewish American who was in Gaza. Like it's too contradictory. It just upends the whole narrative for them. So um, I'm hoping that Brett Weinstein will get some of that courage back, that independent streak that he seems to have once had, but I don't see it happening. And it's the same for like Zionists in general. They can only be in a bubble, in a pampered bubble where they will never ever be challenged, because for anyone who has any knowledge or experience, and takes their work seriously, it's for me it's like playing basketball with like a 5-year old. They just don't stand a chance. And I don't need to get angry or shout or anything. It's just, that's the way it is. So that's why they won't debate me. I mean, so it's so yeah. I mean, Amar, as you were saying, there's from kind of the populist right over throughout the COVID era, especially, they've held up free speech, which I've appreciated. Whereas like a lot of the left became very censorious in the COVID era and the Trump era, calling for censorship of people they don't like, of MAGA and these kinds of things. I mean, my position has always been principled that no, I reject that, and so the right now is becoming demanding censorship once again and saying we need to crack down on any kind of pro Hamas sentiment or opinions or speech because it's dangerous. And so we see them becoming exactly what they've been criticizing for years. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the presidential candidate, is a perfect example of that. The guy who has portrayed himself as the independent candidate, presidential candidate who's going to fight against the permanent war state and the neocons and all of this thing, but he's taking the most hawkish positions on Israel, which he knows nothing about. Just yesterday, I saw a clip that I got a tweet out of him on the Dave Rubin show, or Dave Rubin's podcast, where he said, "It's my job to defend Israel." That's he just said it. It's like it's not his job to prevent war or defend American interests or the American people. It's his job to be Israel first. That is, and when he says defend Israel, it's not the Israeli public and these people who want their loved ones to come home. It's when he says defend Israel, he's talking about defend Benjamin Netanyahu and his band of Zion Nazi fascists who are running the government and driving the world into this into oblivion. So I mean, it's you just see that these people are all hungry for power. They don't have any principles whatsoever, and that's our kind of political media system and sphere. And so that's what I'm trying to take on, when I can.
All right, we're gonna ask maybe two more questions and then get ready to wrap up for tonight. Thank you again, everyone, so much for your time tonight, and thank you to Dan for also giving his time and his knowledge to us tonight. Dan, I'm gonna read a question off from the chat. Rosemary writes, "What are Dan's thoughts about how we can change the public narrative? As Arlene noted, our politicians are afraid of criticizing Israel due to fear of being taken down with accusations of anti-Semitism, as Jeremy Corbyn was."
Well, I think we're in a different period now, because I think the dam has broken on criticism of Israel, where now it's a different feeling. It's a different sentiment publicly, and there's a different popular sentiment about Israel and its crimes than there was in, say, 2014, 2021, even any previous times. I mean, the scale of the killing in Gaza is beyond anything, and with with X and social media and journalists in Gaza getting 4K footage of the carnage, where we're just basically watching a Holocaust in 4K. um it's completely changed public opinion, where that kind of middle ground that maybe was more pro-Israel before is now less sure, and there are a lot more people asking questions. And so that's why we see the crackdown, the desperate crackdown on dissent from our politicians and Ron DeSantis and figures like this, who are they're losing control of the narrative, so they're getting more desperate. We see Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli prime minister, whose parents are hail from Berkeley, California. Um, he's in the U.S. once again, talking to the White House, talking to Congress, doing media hits, and he tweeted that he is very worried that there is a 15-to-1 ratio of pro-Palestine to pro-Israel content on TikTok. Now, I don't use TikTok, but the fact is there's an information war, and Israel is losing it. And so this, younger generation of, people younger than me who are very active on social media, and get their information there, that, they don't read the New York Times, they don't watch CNN, they watch TikTok videos and these kinds of things. They are understanding Israel in a completely different way and what's happening than, my generation or older generations than me, my parents' generation, that is just reflexively pro-Israel. They just, can't shake it. The younger generation has not been brought up like that. And so it's just a completely different thing. There is still a lot of, in the universities and professionally, people who express any kind of criticism of Israel can be fired, can be censored, cracked down. So it's still very difficult for a lot of people, but this massive upswell cannot be denied, and that's why they're so desperate to crack down on it. And I think when the Biden administration says that there's a limited amount of time that this can go on to Netanyahu because of public opinion, that's a direct response to the demonstrations, like here in Washington, D.C., when we had hundreds of thousands of people, and Los Angeles and New York City. And, they know that the American public does not want to see this genocide, does not want to be complicit in it. And the majority of Americans support a ceasefire, and they want the hostages to come home. It's not that, people support Hamas. It's that they understand that this is ethnic cleansing. This is genocide. So I think we're at a the dam has broken. I think we're at kind of a tipping point in public opinion that's really going to change the outcome of this war on Gaza. And Israel is going to come out of this, no matter what, is going to come out of this weakened, in the public image, domestically, internally. It's just not going to be the same. So I don't know where things are going to go from here, but it's not the same Israel that it was, and it's not the same kind of global public opinion that it was.
As I mentioned, we're screening your film "Killing Gaza" on Thursday evening. We have a lot of people. We have like over 300 people registered for that. And Dan, talk to us a little bit. What was it like being in Gaza at that time, and why is it important for Americans to watch that film right now?
Well, it's amazing to see the resurgence of interest in the film. I mean, we released it in 2018, and it kind of had its moment, and I kind of thought that was sort of it. And the amount of interest in it now is it's kind of the prequel to the current genocidal assault on Gaza, is what it shows. So I arrived with Max Blumenthal in Gaza during the 51-day war in the summer of 2014. We arrived at the beginning of a 5-day ceasefire, and we began filming as people came out of the shelters and UNRWA schools back to their homes, where they found their loved ones had been killed and their homes were piles of rubble. Entire neighborhoods were wiped out by Israeli shelling and airstrikes. And that became the basis for the documentary. And so Max left and went back to the U.S. after a little while. But over the next, I stayed, and over the next 3 years, I spent a total of 7 months in the Gaza Strip, um, filming not only, of course, during the war, but um, in the aftermath with people living in the rubble, trying to eke out a life through the cold, harsh winter and the burning hot summer, um, and showing what it's like to struggle under these conditions of siege and constant constant shooting by the Israelis, constant bombing, pretty much. So, um, that documentary basically showed the conditions that Gaza is in 2014. That was an unprecedented assault, and now what's happening now is far, far, far worse. I mean, that was in 51 days in 2014. They killed, I want to say 1,400 people and 551 children. And now what, in 30 days or 31 days, something like that, they've killed, more than 10,000 people, including 4,000 children. So the scale is just, I mean, it's far, far, far more extreme, the levels of killing now. So yeah, I mean, for anyone who wants to understand what Gaza has been, what are the conditions there, I think it's a good portrait of what Gaza has been suffering through. Um, and I really appreciate everyone taking interest in the renewed interest in the film.
Okay, and for the last question for tonight, before we wrap up, before October 7th of this year, the United States, they had been involved funding a proxy war in Ukraine against Russia, and now we're getting more and more involved in this conflict between Israel and Palestine. How can the U.S. afford to have to support both of these conflicts at the same time, Ukraine and Israel?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. The U.S. has approved more money along, for Israel, but not only for Israel, for Ukraine, to keep this war going as long as possible. But I mean, I think, I mean, we just saw 2 days ago that the U.S. is now seeking terms to have some kind of end to the war with Russia, and Zelensky is freaking out, making demands about send more money, and I mean, the gravy train may be ending soon. Um, and so, they're telling the Ukrainians to consolidate your gains. There's even a top Ukrainian military advisor was just assassinated today with a grenade in a birthday present. So, that the entire kind of Ukrainian coup regime may come apart soon, or is eating itself alive as its lifeline runs out from of unlimited permanent funding from the United States. So I think that the battleground has shifted from the main kind of geopolitical um, contact line from Ukraine, Russia, where the United States basically tried to weaken Russia as much as possible and achieve regime change. That has now failed, and so now it's the big goal for the neocons in the United States is Iran, and so that's, I think, what they're gunning for. So we'll have to see if that actually, if there's some kind of war with Iran, to what scale. But I think that's where they're really focused, is Iran.
All right, so we're gonna wrap up the program. Thank you again, everyone, so much for joining us tonight. Whether you're watching us on Zoom, YouTube, elsewhere, uh, thank you for your time. A big thank you to Dan Cohen. Um, Join us, everyone, on Thursday to watch Dan's film Killing Gaza, and join us in person at Community Church of Boston at 565 Boylston Street, the second floor, on Monday, November 13th, for a talk by Max Blumenthal. I'll send a follow up email to everyone who registered for this program, like 300 people, with the recording for this meeting tonight and the links for the two upcoming events. So thank you again, everyone, so much for joining us. I'm going to give you, Dan, the last words. If there's any closing remarks you want to say to everyone.
Well, yeah, thank you to everyone for tuning in and watching this, and make sure to go out any demonstration you can. I mean, this is the biggest thing we can do, is go out and join demonstrations, is be active online. I mean, I know it can be it's very depressing what's happening, and it can feel, people feel defeated and isolated, but tweet, post on Instagram, call your elected representatives, create public pressure in any way you can. It's, human life depends on it. And the sooner this thing ends, the more lives we'll be able to save. So, go to demonstrations, be active on social media. And lastly, check out my outlet, Uncaptured Media. That's what this radioactive looking alphabet soup behind me is supposed to be. I'm working on getting a new graphic made. So you can, on Twitter, it's at Uncaptured News. And we're trying to get a lot of content out there. If you want to support, you can sign up for our Patreon or buy me a coffee or anything like that. That's very much appreciated to keep this thing going into the long term. And yeah, again, thank you to Amar and the Community Church of Boston, and may we see real peace and justice in the Holy Land for all peoples soon.
I mean, okay, I'll send out email to everyone with information to support Dan and to follow Dan. So everyone keep your eyes out for that email. It'll also have information about upcoming events at the church. So keep your eyes out for the email. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dan Cohen.